Well, I tell you, listen, it is that time for us to come together again and to be here in the space and place that we call Ruffin It. That's right, this is where we come to empower your relationships, our relationships, the relationships that mean the most to you and I. And so listen, as we are gathered here in this space and place, listen, you know that we don't come here by accident. We come here intentionally. But the only way other people come is by us also being intentional to invite them. And so listen, you know how we make sure that we are bringing people, letting people know the importance of being here. And so let us go ahead and begin to share this opportunity with people. That's right, it's an opportunity. So listen, we want to go ahead and put names in the comment section. Listen, you want to share this to your own page. Listen, you even would like to take the opportunity to, if you're on YouTube, to be able to share the link so that you can be able to have those that you are in relationship. That's right, to be able to come to this space and place that we call Ruffin It. And so listen, this is where we empower our relationships. You know why we empower our relationships? Because if we aren't intentional, they will become static, they will become stale. Listen, they will become the kind of thing that doesn't bring fulfillment. And so listen, I am glad to be here with you today as we are going to look at this whole idea talking about communication that delivers. That's right, communication that delivers. But listen, we're on part 2 today. Last week I wasn't here with you, but listen, I'm back, I'm well. I am looking forward to us being together again today. And so let us begin to move forward. Now, as we're moving forward, let me also share. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you are hitting that subscribe button, you're hitting that bell icon. If you are following us right here on Facebook, then listen, I'm asking that you would like our page, that you would be sure to hit that bell icon also on the Facebook so that you can get those notifications of when we go live. And so listen, this is actually a great time for you to be there. Hey, listen, Alexander, thank you so much for showing up and being in this space and place. Listen, I've already shared this on my page. And so listen, I thank you for being here today for Ruffin It. And let us just begin to prepare ourselves for this time today for Ruffin It. All right, I'm just making sure that everything is good and ready and set to go. And so listen, so today, as we're talking about communication that delivers, as we're talking about communication that delivers, remember, we're talking about all relationships, whether it's personal, professional, doesn't matter if they're familiar, it doesn't matter what type of relationship that we're referencing. The reality is that communication is the universal element for all relationships. Communication is what bridges the gap. And so listen, so I am excited about being able to help you to be able to have the kind of communication that brings fulfillment in your relationship. So here, when we talk about communication, now remember this is part 2. Part 1, we answered this question that you see there behind me on the screen. And the question is, what's communication? Because if we don't have a real working definition and clarity around what's communication, then we're setting ourselves up for failure because we're already operating from 2 different sides of the spectrum. And so listen, I'm not even going to ask you, but I'm going to tell you, listen, here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 37, King James Version, I always believe that it's important that we recognize that there is a spirit, soul, and body side to every aspect of relationships. And so therefore, when we're looking at this concept of communication, we've got to look at it spiritually. And so spiritually, here's what the scripture says. The scripture says, but let your communication, so that tells me I have a choice. It says, let your communication, which means I do not have to let my communication be what it's telling me to be. But it says, but let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. And so therefore, notice now, he's telling us to let our communication be clear. He says, when you and I don't have clear communication, we put ourselves in subjection to all kind of evil spiritual forces being able to get into the midst of our communication. And this is why there are times in which we have typical conversations that go amok because we don't have the kind of clarity that is important in our communication. And so he says, notice, let your communication be nay, nay, or yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. And so here's how we define communication. We said good communication is the art of sending and receiving a clear message. Now, this is what we said. We said good communication is the art of sending and receiving a clear message. Now, that may sound very simple. That hopefully is very clear. Now, what may not be clear about that definition is what does that actually look like? What does that actually mean? When we say good communication is the art, that means that it is a skill. It's not just an ability, it's a skill of sending and receiving a clear message. And so that word art becomes very important because when you and I talk about communication, most of us think because we have the ability, therefore we're skillful. And I'm telling you, you can be practicing your ability in the wrong way and you can become skillfully wrong in how you and I go about communicating. And so therefore it is an art. It is knowing what to practice and then practicing it correctly to the point that it becomes a skill. It becomes something that you're doing like almost first nature. Why? Because I keep practicing it enough until it is a part of who I am. I'm not a communicator because I know how to speak a language. I am a communicator because I have learned the process and the skills that are necessary to communicate effectively. Now, with that being said, do not allow this to defeat you. Do not allow this to rob you, because sometimes we think, well, because I'm not a good communicator, then I will never, ever rise to the occasion. And what I'm saying to you is that that is not true. If you tell yourself that, then you're already defeated. And so therefore, it is learning what needs to be learned and then practicing it enough to where your confidence grows, your skill increases, and your effectiveness, the results of your communication begins to manifest. And so therefore, notice now, good communication is the art of sending, notice now, receiving. So it's not just sending, but it's also receiving, look, a clear message. And so this is why today I want to talk to you about the art of sending. I want to talk to you about the art of sending. Now, here's the thing. It's important that you know this. Now, I am on my page on Facebook. I'm on the church page here. I'm also on the YouTube channel for the church. And so if you submit questions real time, this is a live, not pre-recorded session, I can answer those questions. Now, we're asking questions that are germane to what it is that we're teaching. And so therefore, I just want you to know I'm here to answer your questions, but they just need to be relevant to what it is that we're discussing. So as we are, and Serena, it's good to have you here with us again today too. So here, I want to talk to you about how to speak a clear and respectful message. How to speak a clear and respectful message. Now notice that, how to speak clear and respectful messages. Now that becomes something that is important because the first thing that we've got to be able to talk about is speaking for yourself. It is the I versus you concept. And I'm going to break that down today. It is the I versus you concept. And so here, when we're talking about, before we even get to that part, when we talk about speaking a clear and respectful message, here's the reality. Even myself sometimes falls into the same trap, is that we will lose our cool in the heat of the moment, and we will say something that we will later regret. Or something will come out in a way in which it doesn't really capture the heart of what we were trying to say. And so the way that we really overcome this is really being able to understand the concept in communication called the I message. It is when you and I are able to get the message across about how we feel and the behavior that goes along with what we're feeling, and how we can communicate that to another person. Now, all of this happens, notice now, without blaming the other person. See, I messages are a way to communicate in any situation. So we're not just talking about when there's a conflict. I'm talking about how we communicate a respectful and clear message so that we don't even have to have a conflict. Because there are times in which some of the challenges that we have happen simply because we have communicated ineffectively, because we have violated the I versus you message. And so here where we're talking about speaking for yourself, the I versus you concept, it is being able to understand what is an I message. What is an I message? Now, an I message these are the kind of messages that are used to give feedback to others while avoiding put downs, judgment statements, or even assigning blame. Let me say that again. When we speak with an I message, it is being able to avoid put downs, judgment statements, or even assigning blame to an issue or to a problem. See, when you and I talk about the I message, it is describing the feeling that the behavior creates or the effect that the behavior has on me when something has occurred. Now, this can be both positive or negative, but it is being able to communicate the feeling that the behavior has on me. It is being able to describe it in such a way that the behavior that needs to change can be articulated without necessarily having to cast blame, judgment, or put downs. Now, I know that may be a whole lot in what I have said, but I think if you stay with me, you'll be able to see that this I message is key to you and I being able to have the kind of communication that brings fulfillment. It fills the gap of when you and I are trying to get a message across, and we're trying to be clear and we're trying to be respectful. And so the question therefore is, how do I use an I message? If the goal is to be able to communicate the feeling of the feeling that I have because of the behavior that was displayed, and how can I articulate this behavior change without casting blame and put down, then here's where you use the I message. It starts with being able to describe your feelings and then to describe the behavior that creates those feelings. Let me say it again. It is being able to describe your feelings and then the behavior that creates those feelings. And obviously you're saying, well, can you give me an example? I sure can. How many times have we said this to someone And let me bring it up on the screen this way. If you look behind me, here's an example of where I feel, and then I name the feeling, and then I say when, and then I describe the behavior. Now, let me give you an example of that very concept. How many times, and listen, we probably said this more than once, and I've learned not to say this, and so therefore I don't say it anymore, but it took a while to get skillful to know how to communicate a feeling that is associated with a behavior without putting down the person, without blaming, and without being judgmental. So here's an example. I feel angry when people call me names. I feel hurt when someone asks what I want to do. I feel hurt when no one asks what I want to do. I feel suspicious when someone tells me one thing and then I find out they are doing another. You see, all of those gives a feeling, but they also describe the behavior of what is helping to promote the feeling. The reason why this becomes important is simply because I'm describing what I'm feeling and I'm describing the behavior of what I'm feeling doesn't necessarily mean that you are responsible for what I'm feeling, but it does let you know what is happening so that if there's any contributions from your side, this may help to eliminate the feeling, and this may help to remove the behavior without ever having blamed you, put you down, or even been judgmental towards you. Now, I know that this may sound easy, but easy does not necessarily mean simple. It means that if enough practice happens, that I can become skillful in this regard. When I use iMessages, when you use iMessages, this is when I'm owning my feelings. This is when I am coming across, not as judging the other person, because they feel the same way no matter who is doing that type of behavior. But it gives information about the behavior that needs to change. See, here's what sometimes happens, is that when you and I don't use the I message, you and I automatically revert to the you message. And here's what it sounds like when we talk about what are you messages. This is when I'm using the word you, Y-O-U, in a sentence, and I am telling the other person that they're responsible for what I'm feeling. Here's a good example. You make me so angry when you don't clean up after yourself. Now, listen to that again, because I promise you, somebody has said this. Either you've said this to somebody or somebody has said this to you. And here it is. You make me so angry when you don't clean up after yourself. Now, here's the reality. No one has that much power and control over anybody. I can't make you angry. You can't make me angry. The only way that I get angry is when I make a choice to be angry. I am not angry simply because you've done some things. I made a choice as a result of some things that you have done. Now, it's easy to feel like that when my anger goes from 0 to 60, that somehow something is responsible for me feeling this inflamed. But the reality is that no one has that much power and control over you unless you give it to them. And so when we tell ourselves or we tell somebody else, you make me so angry, what we are saying to them is that I have no control over me. You have full control over my emotions and what I think and what I feel. And therefore, you are solely responsible for why I am feeling what I'm feeling. Now, granted, this may not be what we are trying to tell the person. This may not be what we are intentionally telling the person, although we may be. The reality is this is what comes across to the person that hears, you make me so angry. And therefore, it behooves you and I to be able to understand that the reason I feel angry is because I've allowed myself to get angry. See, I can be frustrated, I can be upset, I can be bothered. All of these are things that can occur. Now, I may have had something to trigger this, but after the trigger happened, I had a choice in how I wanted to respond to the trigger. When I say things like, you make me so angry, that is more of a reaction than a response. That is saying that I have allowed you to have more control, and therefore I'm at your whims. I am at your power. I am at your authority, and I have no control. And this is why it becomes so important for you and I to recognize that the language that we use, even if I don't say this out loud and I tell myself this inwardly, I am still putting myself in position to only be at ease when this person stops doing the things to make me angry. And so therefore, this is why when you talk about the I message versus the you message, and when I use the I message, I can own my feelings. I can own what is impacting me while telling you or anyone else that this may relate to what is happening so that you can be informed on what's occurring without being judgmental, without being put down, without being negative towards you. And so therefore, I can change this and I can say, I feel angry when you call me names. Right now, I have specified that I'm angry. I'm in ownership of my feelings. But I have pointed out that, hey, this is because of something that you have said. And even then, I would not encourage you to use you, but I'm saying if we were trying to filter out the appropriateness of using you versus I, owning my feelings and pointing out the behavior helps everyone to understand what's happening. And so therefore, this is why you statements can be very inflammatory. You statements can incite the kind of interaction that causes turmoil and conflict. And even though that may not have been our intention, the reality is that will be possibly or probably the outcome. And my job here is to help you to know how to send a clear and respectful language, message. And so therefore, listen, when you're using this this you message, here's why we want to avoid the you message. See, it blames the specific person for the situation. The goal is not to pass blame. The goal is to have ownership, invite the persons to be a part that they may play, because it could very well be that you're feeling what you're feeling, and it is not at the result of what somebody else has done. It may be your perception of what has happened. And that was not what they were doing at all. But because we've already cast blame by saying this is your fault and this is what you've done, we've already set it up for it to be a war and not a conversation. When you use that word you, it sounds more judgmental. Often when you look at our body language when we say you, sometimes we'll point the finger, we get that look in our eyes. We will communicate. You remember in the part one, we talked about how body language is the higher percentage out of all the different parts of communication. And so therefore, our body language began to suggest that somehow you're at fault, you're responsible. And until you change this, nothing will be well. And we've set ourselves up for failure because we have not really set a clear and respectful message. Now, I'm looking to see whether or not anybody has any questions. I appreciate the comments and the interaction here on Facebook and my YouTube people. And so I'm going to keep going. Listen, when you begin to use you, it is easy for insults and labels and put downs to be used. And so therefore, you can be a very derogatory, not so much on a major scale, but on a minor scale that can create a situation, that can turn a minor situation, into a major situation. It holds the person who's listening to be responsible for your feelings. Like, you can't be responsible for my feelings. They're my feelings. Now, you may be a part of helping to feed my feelings, but you can't be responsible for my feelings. And so therefore, it can also make the listener become defensive and start making excuses because they don't want you to feel what you're feeling. And so when you say you, it gives them the sense that they're responsible. They have to do something about this. And so sometimes it just creates excuses and it creates these sort of defense mechanisms. And when you have excuses and defense mechanisms, listen, you don't move towards solutions. You don't move towards a place where you're able to address what is the issue and what is the problem and how can we work on this to avoid this from occurring again. When we have defenses and excuses, it does not embrace and invite a discussion by which we can look at the issue for what it's worth. And therefore, this is why you and I have to really be intentional about getting away from using the word you when we're trying to send a clear and respectful message. Here's another point. As soon as the listener hears you, they focus on what is said as a personal attack. They feel like this is a insult or an assault on me. And the goal is to bring them into the conversation, not to create the kind of dialogue that they feel like is me against you or you against me. And so this is why when we're talking about having the kind of communication that delivers, when we're talking about having a clear and respectful message that we send, we've got to be able to talk from the I side and not from the you side. Using the general term rather than you, others are more likely to listen and more willing to change their behavior. See, when I go from saying you make me so angry to saying I feel angry when I hear you call me names, that is a lot more inviting to say, you know what, I don't want you to feel angry. I don't want you to feel insulted. I don't want you to have these kind of negative feelings. And so therefore it invites me to be a part of the solution. By not accusing someone directly, it enables them sometimes to even save face. And so this is why I'm saying to you that if we are going to have the kind of communication, dialogue, and interaction, it's going to be because we use I messages versus you messages. Now, I will say this much. The only time, there is a time for you messages. There is a time for you messages. But the only time to use the you message is when the person has done something good and you want to reward the good behavior. And so you can say something like, you have done a great job in cleaning up after yourself. Thank you. You could say something like, I really appreciate it when you ask me what I want to do. Another example, when you're honest about what you have been doing, that builds the trust I have in you. See, that's a good way to be able to use you. But often I say to people that if you have often more challenges with using you, and this becomes something that is like, yeah, but my tendency is probably not to speak in such a positive way when I use you, then I would tell you, don't even pay attention to that part, because you would want to say to them, such and such, instead of saying something like, Orlando, you've done a great job in cleaning up after yourself. Thank you. Putting their name in there. It all depends on the kind of relationship this is. For some of our friends, we have certain names that are a little more acceptable kind of privately than publicly. And so even being able to put some of those names in the place of you makes it a little more personal, and it gives this sort of encouragement to where I'm wanting us to be able to fix this. I want us to be able to resolve this. I don't want this to continue to be an ongoing problem. And sometimes here's the issue. When we recognize that there is a problem, sometimes we wait too long before we acknowledge that there's a problem. Sometimes because in our attempt to be patient, sometimes in our attempt to hope that they're going to figure it out, they're going to recognize the error of their ways, and therefore they're just going to self-correct. Sometimes, and that's cool if we're able to really even do that. But even then, you've got to be able to recognize your own thermostat. You've got to be able to recognize your own thermometer and recognize when frustration is going up another notch, because as you are aware of your thermometer and you're measuring how your frustration is growing, if you don't catch it early, I promise you, out of frustration, out of impatience, out of intolerance, you begin to go back to you, because you have been so engulfed with the flames of your emotions. You're probably not thinking about how can I communicate to them in such a non-judgmental, a non-condemning, a non-put down type of method. You're thinking, I want them to feel what they feel. I want them to have the pain that I'm having. I'm wanting them to experience what I have experienced. And so even if it is not intentional, a tooth for a tooth or an eye for an eye, the feeling that comes along with it begins to give you the kind of thinking, and it gives you the kind of feelings that begin to go down that route, because your thermometer has reached its highest, and it no longer has space and place to give the person the room to grow. And therefore, you've got to acknowledge for yourself when enough is enough, before enough is too much, so that you can begin to address these kind of things in a way, remember, that it's going to use the I message and not the you message, because my goal is to bring a resolution. My goal is to send a clear and respectful message. My goal at this point is to even avoid any type of conflicting conversation, This is on the preventive side. This is on the side that says, way before we get down that road, I want to be able to have enough cushion. I want to have enough grace. I want to have enough space in this conversation in my heart and in my mind with this person, so that when I begin to send a clear and respectful message, I have enough room to be able to help them grow, to help us grow, because the goal is for us to be in relationship. The goal is not for us to be in conflict. The goal is not for us to be on each other's nerve. The goal is not for us to constantly have one issue going from the next to the next. That's not the goal. But if we don't deal with the things that are important, it sometimes becomes the outcome of a lack of or negligence towards being preventive in the relationship overall. Now I'm looking to see whether or not there are any questions that anybody might have here on this particular topic of where we're talking about communication that delivers, in particular, how to send a clear and respectful message. Because remember now, good communication is the art of sending and receiving a clear message. And as much as I know that we have talked about what we have talked about today, I recognize that this requires practice. Sometimes it requires unlearning and then relearning so that you can begin to become good at communicating. And when something has been drilled down, whether it was misinformation or whether it was just wrong practices, bad behaviors that I picked up from somewhere, and I just began to operate in this manner, this is the kind of thing that creates the kind of unlearning so that I can begin to now relearn what is important, what is the skill, what is the practice, so that I can begin to do this more naturally. But the reality is that anything that I am learning at first is going to sound and feel very mechanical. But that's okay, because mechanical does not mean bad or phony or non-organic. It just means I'm at the beginning stage. And so sometimes that's just where we are. That's just where we're starting. But that's not where we stay, because we are intentional about ensuring that our communication is effective, because we practice the right components. All right. Well, listen, I am pastor and therapist Marcus Ruffin. Now remember, here's what we do. Listen, this is about professional or personal relationships, because it doesn't matter whether we're talking about family or where we're talking about the in the house, outside the house, whether we're talking about friendships. The reality is that unless we begin to do the work that is necessary, that comes with the kind of relationships that we have, then I promise you we won't get better. And if we don't get better, the relationship doesn't get better. And if the relationship doesn't get better, then it begins to fizzle and die out. And there are many, many God-given relationships that have faltered, gone astray, simply because we failed to do the necessary work to keep them fruitful and enjoyable, because that is our role. That is our responsibility. And so listen, I want to thank you again for being here for Ruffin' It, Relationship Empowerment. Now listen, here's another thing that you know that I always encourage you to do. And I always encourage you to, hey, help support the ministry that brings this to you. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in California. And so listen, I've gone to school, I've taken tests to get my license. And so therefore I'm saying to you, listen, none of this has come without the necessary work to bring you the kind of information that helps you be better in your relationship. And what I'm asking is that you would take the opportunity to be able to support Life Empowerment Church. And so as you see there on the screen, there are some different ways in which you can go about supporting Life Empowerment Church here. And so here, listen, you see the Cash App that is on the screen before you, LifeEmpowermentCh. For those of you, listen, you may prefer PayPal. As you can see there on the screen, there is the PayPal information. And so we thank you so much for you making that happen with PayPal. Now, there are those of you that listen, you like to mail in checks, you like to mail in money orders, and that's good too, because that works. And so as you see here on the screen, here is our mailing address, Life Empowerment Church, P.O. Box 7958, Moreno Valley, California, 92552. And so I thank you so much for you doing just that. And here's the one thing, listen, that we've been asking. We've been asking that you would do the Jesus gift. What is the Jesus gift? It's where, listen, it's going to help our media ministry. You see the screen behind me. Listen, there is some new technology that we're wanting to use. And I'm telling you, when we get this upgrade, the screen behind me is going to be different. I'm telling you, it's going to make the experience much more enjoyable. But we need $100 from 30 people. We've already raised $2,000. We need $3,000 more to be able to get everything that we need to be able to make this happen. And so therefore, listen, here's what I'm asking. If I can have everyone to send in that $100, listen, it would make a world of a difference. And I think for what it is that we offer, what it is that we give, I believe that it is well worth that and more. And so listen, so I thank you so much for you being able to be here today for Ruffin' It. All right, so listen, this is Pastor Marcus. This is Therapist Marcus. And listen, I thank you so much for being here. And listen, I look forward to seeing you again next Thursday as we will be here again talking about communication that delivers. Because listen, there's some more pieces to the process that I want to give to you so that you can have the kind of relationships that are fulfilling, a blessing, and enjoyable. So listen, I look forward to seeing you again on next Thursday. All right, God bless you.